So BFSI 2024, the rise of AI-led technology arbitrage and the red herring of IT spending rebound. Let's already talk about that, the red herring of IT spending rebound. We've been saying this is a lumpy year. Those of you that are enterprises, you know there's not magically big bags of money hanging around. Those of you that are services or technology firms, you know there's no big bags of money hanging around. But it's a little bit better than last year, and that's part of what we'll talk about. Okay, here's our agenda. The topic I just mentioned, the rise of AI-led technology arbitrage. You've heard us talk about this throughout this event. Now we'll talk about it in a BFSI context. And maybe, depending on how it goes, maybe a BFS, and separately an insurance context. We'll see if we can do a little bit of that. We'll talk about, we've got some great, I always like to talk about farm fresh data, if you will. We've got a whole, literally data from Q1 of this year, where we'll talk a bit about this so-called red herring of the spending rebound and sort of show you what we're seeing and what's driving it. And then lastly, but not least, because there's this thing I've heard of called GenAI, and I thought it might be interesting if we talked a little bit about that in the context of BFSI. So we also have some really great data, some of which you've seen, but this again will be, because one of the fun things I get to do as an analyst, all of us do, is we get to slice and dice our data. So we go in and we play with the demographics and say, here's what the general populace says across all industries. What does it look like in a banking and financial services and insurance context? So we'll show you a little bit of that. First, I'm just going to talk about this thing we've been talking about, which is AI-driven technology arbitrage. Because while Phil and Saurabh, they created this idea. I think we first put this S-curve out last year or so. But I'm just always cognizant of the fact that we've talked about it a lot, but no one's actually talked us through it. So I'm just going to take 2 quick minutes on this. And it's, despite the fact there's a lot going on this slide, it's a pretty straightforward description, because the sort of very flat and gradual, and I slow my voice intentionally, the very flat and gradual picture there, that is an S-curve, that's labor arbitrage, people-driven outsourcing. If you look at the time scale on the bottom, the elements that have been in there, that's been the outsourcing industry, either whether you're a purveyor or if you're a consumer. That's how we really regard it. And there's always been people at the heart of this driving it. But you flash to what's going on, certainly now with the advent of GenAI, but you'll see we've got other various technology-driven change agents up there as well. Starting with RPA, Phil first, he put the P in RPA with Alistair Bathgate, the former CEO of Blue Prism many, many years ago. RPA, when we first started covering it back in 2012 or something like that, it was all about, hey, you think that by sending everything offshore, you've gotten your costs as low as you could. Well, no, actually, there's technology that's going to help you take it even lower. But these types of technologies have started driving change. And we said in 2019, we said RPA is dead. It wasn't that the technology was, I view it very much as a Band-Aid, but it wasn't that the technology was bad. It just was a singular technology. It needed to be used in much more of an integrated, intelligent automation context. But what's happening, and that's why this S-curve now is the truncated S-curve, because we believe part of the value of GenAI is it kind of kicked the doors back open for AI and all things automation, and change agents that are going to help all of us drive change in how we actually get things done. And we believe the impact then is to shrink this S-curve down. And we're calling this move, going from the labor arbitrage, the people-driven arbitrage, to now it's the technology arbitrage. And again, and I'm just going to repeat it because maybe it reassures me, but the people don't go away. It's like we've been saying throughout this whole event. We remain relevant, but it's our ability to leverage the technology. Like we've said a few times, our jobs are not going to be taken by AI. Our jobs are going to be taken by people using AI. And that's what this implication is. The technology-led is having the humans lead with the bounty of change agents that we have to do things differently. And we think it's going to happen quick. If you've learned anything from this event so far, not yet is pretty much where we are. But what I've heard from so many of you is that there's certainly that element of hope and knowledge that you're not behind, even if it feels like it. Everyone else is sort of, I think perhaps because we kicked off the event yesterday talking about how the platform is smoldering, not burning. It seemed to like, sort of soothe everyone, perhaps, and make you comfortable that you're not behind. We're all trying to get there. And get there we will, because that's not, like, if you look at the timing here, this is sort of like a multi-year time scale. All right, so that's our AI-driven tech arbitrage model. And so let's talk a little bit more in the context of banking and financial services. So our preliminary data, it shows an IT spending rebound. I'll just quickly, this goes across industries. I just clicked and brought up little boxes around, connect the dots around banking and financial services and insurance. We do very much look at them separately because there's different dynamics going on. But we bring them together for conversations like this. So we all sort of lived through it, but like the highlight reel of this is 2022. Remember like our joy of being like, we're coming out of a pandemic. And so much digital change and modernization. So many things happened and were catalyzed by the horrible pandemic because they had to be. It's like we still had to figure out how to get work done in that like very awkward remote context. The offshoot of that, though, is that throughout the once we stabilize, kind of 2021 and 22 were years of significant expenditure to enable, again, BFSI context, to enable a lot of modernization. Look at how big the average spend across industries in 2022, and what this is reflecting is expected increase in your IT budget, inclusive of services. 11% on average across industries. In financial services, BFSI, it was around 10% or so. We know what happened in 2023, perhaps exacerbated in first half of last year. Remember all those bank failures? It was kind of a cruddy start to 2023. But all of your discretionary spend, it fell off a cliff. I see some head nods from the UBS ladies in the front here. It was a bad year last year. And so you kind of got to keep the lights on. You got things ticking. What I hear from both sides, from the enterprises I talk with, as well as from the service providers and technology community, it was really hard to get funding for a whole bunch of new initiatives. Oh, and by the way, there was this thing called GenAI last year. And you guys tell me, I heard Phil refer to it earlier as, yeah, you're like looking for loose change and like the virtual couch of your enterprise to try and get GenAI stuff funded last year. So you see, on average across industries, 3% increase, expected increase in IT budgets last year. For banking, that was, let's see what insurance was 4, banking was 3. I'm the first to say, these numbers they're not accurate. No data like this is ever accurate, but it gives you a flavor of what the trend is. Higher in 2022, lower in 2023. Okay, so now 2024. We did this survey at the very beginning of 2024, and what we see on average, 2024, expected increase in IT budgets, 7%. I will say, I think that this is inflated to a certain degree. I think it reflects many organizations wanting to spend more, as opposed to we have another gigantic big bucket of cash and discretionary spend to go do cool and interesting things. I do also think that because we're in a higher rising interest rate economy coupled with inflation, that we've got a big fat cost of living increase of sorts that gets reflected in this as well. So I take this down to so for banking, we see an average of 5%. Insurance is a little bit higher. Insurance is less mature in terms of modernization than we find on the banking side of the house. 2 seconds, I'll take a quick, because I do actually want, despite the fact I'm standing up here, I do want it to be a conversation. But we see it's going up. I do, the grain of salt to take this with, I think it does reflect people's wants in banking and financial services and insurance, and honestly across most sectors, a want to have more spend. But what I do know, this is quantitative data. What I do know qualitatively is there's truth to it. Like even tied to GenAI that I was just talking about a moment ago, there are GenAI budgets this year because it's something that was known. We all essentially rolled into 2023 with the budget plan there, and GenAI was not part of it. It is something that there are budgets for today. So there's definitely, again, The data is never accurate for this type of forecast, but the trend is right. There is growth in this year. It's just still imperfect. There's few and far between gigantic, massively funded transformation projects, but there's incremental projects, and it's more than just keeping the lights on. So with that, Rohan, you had a question, and the big question for all of you guys is, agree, disagree? Does this reflect your reality? Rohan, kick us off.
Well, I think your numbers on the increase are actually much lower because financial services is spending a ton of money on risk and regulatory stuff in the increased budget. So what you're saying is it's probably even south of like 2 or 3%.
It's
Most budgets are flat or down, and whatever extra money they've gone up, most is for risk and regulatory stuff. Hardly anyone's like doing true innovation.
it's well.
Or they've been asked to fund innovation out of cutting something else or efficiencies or something like that. We've seen over the last year or so, service providers have been asked to take furloughs and all of that stuff because of the cost pressures.
So there's, I'm not sure if there's a question in there. Yeah.
Your numbers are probably 7% is a bit too generous.
Like I said, thus the red herring of the spend increase. But so I know, so Rohan, he comes from representing from on the enterprise side, most recently doing third-party risk at US Bank. Any comments from the service provider side? Anyone want to comment on whether this reflects your reality of what you're seeing with your clients? Nobody wants to talk about this? Okay. That's okay.
The spend, what we are seeing is the spend in BFSI is definitely the spend in BFSI. Look, the spend in BFSI is definitely higher this year compared to last year.
Yeah.
But from the service provider side, we are also seeing a trend where a lot of the investments is going into GenAI and especially Copilot, for example. And we are also seeing a trend where the hyperscalers are now actively competing, actually. They're just not participating, they're competing. Some of the clients are actually looking forward to, let's say, Microsoft to take full ownership on delivering outcomes, which means actually the budget will be given to Microsoft in terms of how they want to spend with which SI, which provider, at what scale and what duration. So that's sort of the difference we are seeing. So in the sense, there are more competitors in the mix now than there were even 3 years ago.
I think it's an interesting observation. Just on, and I'll sort of take Microsoft almost as, obviously they're a gigantic software company and they're doing great business with Copilot right now. But they're also one of the big cloud providers. And so even in the context of sort of Microsoft, if we go Azure and then we compare AWS and GCP, they're pulling through a lot of dollars. There's interesting partnerships with the service provider community. But those same, again, through the hyperscaler lens, they need the service provider help. So maybe there's opportunities being funneled through them, the funding being funneled through them, but they need all of the service provider community because that's not their core business. All right, so in any case, I'm not going to belabor this because we have so much other great data going on, but this is kind of the point that I'm ultimately trying to make here is that there's no like magic fix to the spending. It's still a conservative year. There's so many other macroeconomic, global conflicts. Like there's a variety of things going on in the marketplace that are continuing to keep this, again, incrementally growing, but going in the right direction. And that at least is not doom and gloom, if you will. Okay. Phil had a version of this slide up. This is actually the same data, but specific for BFSI. I think we've got 117 BFSI leaders across, we say global 2,000. It just means we're not looking at like the smallest like local banks or community banks. But it's the point that we've made a few times today, which is particularly in the banking and financial services context, it's a bit of, we're talking about budgets. And so you have to ask the question responsibly. So who's actually making the decisions? In financial services, it's always been interesting because while IT does so much in banking and financial services and insurance, lines of business, like they're the ones who really understand what's needed, what's necessary. So I feel like in this particular set of sectors, you've always had a much more active participation from the business, if you will, complementing IT. But this is just another sort of proof of that point, if you will, that it is literally, it's like you got roughly about 50-50 split between IT and business. And so for those who represent the BFSI enterprises in the audience, you know you need to speak up and make sure you're represented, because nobody knows your business better than you do. That's your life within line of business. But it's those that are on the, so that's the business side of it. For those representing the provider community in the audience, just, I mean, many firms, like, you do business with the CIO's office. That is not your reality. That cannot be, like, your growth path going forward. Success is precedented on making sure you can speak business. That's absolutely essential. Agree, disagree? Yeah? All right, I think we'll just leave that one there. That's a pretty basic one. All right, so talking about, so the AI-led technology arbitrage. So here's another view on spending for this year, okay? So this is, and actually these services numbers. So before I was showing you overall IT services expected spend, we also asked about, okay, what are your BPO specific budgets look like? And I'll self-assess our use of terminology like BPO and ITO, because there's just a big old blend going on right now. But for purpose of conversation, work with me on this one, okay? All right, so BPO expected spend about 4%. Based on some of the macroeconomic factors we were talking about, this is flat as far as I'm concerned. There's not a hell of a lot of new growth going on here. IT services is not too far behind. It's coming in marginally more. There's a lot of new build stuff, if you will, as well as tons of modernization, as well as good old keeping the lights on. That gives maybe a little bit more pop to IT services. So not terribly exciting, but so where's the so-called where's the spending coming from? Oh, look, when we ask about what specifically the emerging tech spend looks like, suddenly we're in double digits. Remember double digits? What a beautiful place double digits is. Double digits, led by the emerging tech spend. And what's at the heart of that? That is, well, I'll show you what's at the heart of that. We gave this gigantic laundry list of like any possible cool thing that you could think of that anyone's spending money on right now. And what's at the top of the list? It's not GenAI. It's almost at the top of the list. But good old machine learning is at the top of the list. You guys are obviously in my BFSI session, so you know something about financial services. Most banks, a lot of insurance companies had very rich and robust AI programs already. So many of the enterprises I speak with, like the data science department, they're like, we're so popular right now. It's good to be back. AI is something that's existed. Like, that's come up a few times today. This is not, Ray said it. Ray's been doing this for a bazillion years. AI is not new, but what we can thank GenAI, and like I said before, it sort of kicked open the door again, and we're having this revitalization of the machine learning, the AI essentially, but largely of the flavor of machine learning. Top of the pack here, because particularly when you already have something, makes it a hell of a lot easier to do more with it. So more AI. Generative AI is number 2, though. Data platforms is right there in the mix, because as we've heard, we all know this. We've heard it a bunch yesterday and today. There ain't no AI unless you've got good data to train it, to build the models, train the models, refine the models, govern the models. You need data for that. The fourth one, and I intentionally kept it in there because this one is very insurance. I think the first 3, that cuts both ways. That's banking and insurance. IDP, intelligent document processing, that's definitely coming. It's there in banking, but like heavily driven from like claims processing and doing smart things within the insurance domain. So these are the things, like when we look at like what the heck is getting the emerging tech spend up for BFSI, these are the things that are driving it. And so when I say AI-led technology arbitrage, these are the things that are capturing some of that budget today. This is what our data says. I've talked to many of you and many more. Does this reflect your reality? You guys have any comment on this from the UBS?
For us, I think all these things are done in various silos from
Yeah.
business side and across IT side also and processing side also. But right now, I would refrain on saying anything because we are more focused on the integration they're going through.
Yeah, it's a very fair point. Yes, in the back.
Where would, thank you, something like cybersecurity spending fall into those buckets, do you think?
Well, so it's a fair point. So I'm looking to see if we actually, I think the way that this list came about, it's literally a technology list, if you will, whereas cyber is, there's definitely tech that enables cyber,
Yeah.
but we would look at like the sister list, like because for BPO and for IT services, there's a similar laundry list for each of those,
Yeah.
and that one, that would end up on our IT services
Okay.
list, if you will. And I can tell you it was number one.
I was going to say, because that's where our money is getting spent in
Yeah.
a lot of cases. Okay.
Okay. Yes.
Maybe I think that cybersecurity is part of that very first line, right? I mean, there's ton of
That's
AI
fair.
ML
Yep,
happening in
that's a
that
great
space, or
comment.
actually all the spaces. So I'll not be surprised if that's covered in that, which I relate to. But my just a comment or an observation, I see metaverse, number 5.
Metaverse?
Yeah. And I'm kind of surprised. I'm curious if anybody is doing anything with it, right? I mean, that's exactly my reaction is. I don't think we even talk about
Okay,
it.
so insurance kicked this one up. And so if it didn't say metaverse and it said AR, VR, would that?
But what? But what? I know what here.
Okay. Yeah, no, I know.
I mean, I work in an insurance company.
Yeah, yeah.
Interesting. But I don't, I mean, just an observation. I mean,
Yep.
I relate, I hear you,
Hey,
but I
and
don't think real,
Actively investigating or
yeah,
what,
sure,
so
yeah.
you could check off
2
a
people.
bunch of
Okay.
things.
Thank you,
Yeah, thank you.
Betsy.
Just an observation or a
No,
comment. Thank you.
indeed. Hey, and you just even brought more broadly on the metaverse topic. And so I joked, New York Times, some journalist quipped that it was metaverse, which I will shamelessly use for the rest of my life because things are funny when they're true. But we had a big metaverse study planned. We did one, and we just haven't done much on it because you're all telling us it's not that important. So, I mean, again, the data is reflective of a trend. It's not absolute truth. So it is always a bit of take with a grain of salt. Okay, keeping us moving. Okay, yes, please. Yeah.
I guess for many of the people in the room, the thing about looking at it from a services perspective would be a little bit more aligned with what they're thinking. So what I mean by that is saying it's KYC, it's call center, and that's where we're informing and putting those things in. It's cyber, and that because people are sitting there trying to figure out how are you using this IT tool, but I go, for most of us, we think according to our business divisions or their
Functions
subproducts.
in line of
Functions.
business. No, it's a very fair comment. And even like the comment I made before about many financial institutions and insurers already had existing AI programs. We know it's not just a function that, oh, we're doing AI stuff today. It's all applied AI, applied to each of those business functions, like whether it be regulatory compliance, whether it be contact center, whether it be collections, fill in your blank of what the domain actually is. It is that applied. So you're absolutely right. Everything, it's the same way, like even this session, I always say everything takes place in an industry, and within the industry, everything takes place in your respective line of business. You mentioned the silos within each organization, and it's also trying to make sure that you can actually do horizontal things across your organization, which is really, really hard. But it's a great point, though. All right. Looking at a couple of other things. For GenAI, so I've made the assertion that kind of tied to that AI-led tech arbitrage. I just showed you some data. That's kind of what goes to the top of the list. And so this is a recent study. The data I just showed you, we have published. What I'm about to show you, not published yet. Published soon, so you guys get a nice sneak peek of it. First time that we're showing any of the industry cuts. And so this was a study, I think overall it was 550 enterprises. We've got like a nice juicy 162 BFSI leaders across the world. And this was a GenAI study, and it was very much, what are you doing with, what are you trying to do with GenAI? So that's kind of the context of this study. My colleague Dana Daher, that's right here, is the author of this study. So if you want to like stalk Dana later, please do so. She would love to talk about it. In any case, when we looked at it from the industry standpoint, or what did I say? The show me the money. So I made the comment earlier, last year you were looking for the spare change for GenAI. This year we actually see some dedicated budgets for it. So look at this nutso number. To my also other point I made, it reflects a trend, not the reality. The BFSI enterprises, the 162 people, told us that they're dedicating, I love this, an average of 10% of their tech budgets are going to GenAI. That is an impossibility. So again, I say, sometimes when people answer surveys, they give the answer that they either think is true, or in this case, that they want to be true. But again, take it as the trend. There is budget being dedicated to GenAI. That's what I want you guys to really take away from this, not what the actual number is, okay? And sort of tied to your point earlier, which is, and it's baked into a bouquet of broader initiatives. And I guess I'll ask this as a question. Is there a concept of your GenAI initiative, or is it baked into something that's broader? You guys tell me. Is it, okay, baked in? Exactly, it has to be, because what the hell is that, right? Okay, agree? Okay.
It's AI and data analytics umbrella in which
Exactly, okay. And then sort of continuing, so what comes next? It's growing. That part I think we can all agree with. We've got to get through, we have some dedicated budget this year, just as we've talked about this whole event, smoldering platform, we need to get to the burning platform. This is going to continue to grow. Even the truncated S-curve I showed a few slides back, this will continue to go. We're expecting that will be continued increase. I'm not sure we're ever really getting to that 10%, but like we see the direction of travel. And here, I love this. All right, so sources of GenAI investment. I'm honestly wildly alarmed by this data, but all right, where's the money coming from? Number one, using additional dedicated budget specifically for GenAI. Essentially saying there is dedicated budget for GenAI that's specifically for that purpose. Baked in, sure. Look at number two, though. Number two is the one that scares the absolute bejesus out of me because I feel like it's dangerous. Shifting funds from other resources or investments. Okay, that one, actually, that's not true. It's number three that scares the bejesus out of me. Shifting funds, there's still a lot of that going on. That's kind of what we saw last year. You're still getting creative. Even the point we just made a moment ago, which is GenAI is bundled into other initiatives. This kind of, you're like, yeah, cloud, GenAI is in there. Whatever, cyber, GenAI is in there. That's part of what that is. Three, I apologize, I misspoke. Three is the one that scares the absolute bejesus out of me. Predicted savings generated by GenAI. This is the productivity trap. Oh, we're going to save 4% of Elena's time, 4% of Rohan's, 12% of Melissa's, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not saying that that's not possible. I'm saying the history, my observation of doing research in this area is that you may very well get that productivity, but how do you reinvest it? That's the part I feel like no one ever actually comes back to. Betsy, you and I have talked about it. I remember when you were the Automation Anywhere guru. You probably still are. Do you agree or disagree with that point I just made?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's more about how much money are we spending on certain business problems,
Mm.
and where is GenAI really the solution? I think that's probably a better way to think about it.
Yeah.
So if my business problem as an insurance company is I get a lot of unstructured data, voice, handwritten documents, all kinds of stuff, I need some sort of ingestion solution.
Mm-hmm.
That could be self-service, it could be some other type of automation, it could be document ingestion, but that's the business problem. GenAI may solve a slice of that.
I believe that related to
Yep.
of headcount. So
That's my next slide.
so the CFO would be willing to say, okay, give me the names.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Well, and that's the thing too, particularly more in a banking context, everyone's favorite ratio, cost to income ratio. Why has this ratio been, despite all the money that everyone has invested in the last couple of decades, why are cost to income ratios still the same that they have been? Because you tend to invest and fight one half of that problem, which is of course the cost side, just to be super clear about that, as opposed to the, hey, how are you actually driving more income? The title of Dana's study, what this data is going to go into, the hypothesis going into it, and essentially what I hope to leave you guys with today, if you're only looking at productivity, you're looking at the wrong thing. And I will point out, the other part of the data that I just brought up here is for that shifting funds from other resources or investment. Okay, so what's the stuff that it's appended to? IT infrastructure, that's meant to be a shift. Research and development, for larger institutions, there is an R&D function. Software development, this is straight up, we're like, the AI is doing the coding, we have money. No, you don't. So I did say I'm mostly more alarmed from the predicted savings, but the creativity of where the funding's come from should make us all a little bit alarmed. All right, I have 2 minutes left. Let's see, I think this is my last slide. My point, if you're only using GenAI for productivity gains, you're missing the bigger picture. You got to focus on the reshaping the jobs. So just thought you guys would be interested to see top business benefits from GenAI. Oh, look, what is at the absolute top of the list here? Improved productivity and efficiency. And there's inherently nothing wrong with that. But like I was saying a moment ago, you have to do perhaps not just that, or if you do just do that, you've got to figure out how you reinvest the cost. Oh, except we don't actually do that. Let's look at what number 2 is and number 3. Improve customer engagement and satisfaction. I'll actually bring up the next part of this. Because when we ask, so the donut chart, I guess it's not a pie, the donut, when we asked, all right, so I looked at, we've got an ongoing database of in-production GenAI use cases. So I went through, I've got 51 of them. I actually probably have doubled that at this point. This is not like funky, like good ideas. This is stuff in production. And so 51 in production GenAI use cases across BFSI. The biggest category is analytics and insights. That makes sense. The second one is customer experience. And this is a lot of like intent tuning with the chatbots that are helping manage customer experience and things like that. There's good stuff going on there. Kind of like Sandeep said in the last session, they're not the sexiest use cases or in production use cases, but they're real use cases. But we have to find a way to, I always say there's 3 kinds of value. There's the bottom line value, that's the productivity and cost savings we've been talking about. There's the top line value, that's literally driving new revenue. That's the other side of that's the income side of that ratio. And then there's stakeholder value, and so that's your customers, that's your shareholders, and things like that. We have to, in financial services, I believe you've got to be hitting all 3 of those. And so much of what this data is showing is that we're really only going after the cost and productivity. And so I think our favorite part of this is it's really all about pushing that enhanced creativity and innovation and finding ways to start to appreciate not just the cost savings and the productivity enhancements, but truly changing how the work is actually done. Just like the title says, we have to, if we're not just replacing the people, we're empowering the people to use AI to do things better. That's ultimately what we're after. I think, yeah, look at that. The timer just went. Any just before, because everyone's going to start storming back in here. Questions, comments, things you wanted to hear more? No. There we go. I'll just put the.
On the last data point, this might be an obvious comment, but a lot of these things overlap. And to your point about customer engagement and satisfaction, I've been following the CX space and contact centers, and some of the biggest use cases we're seeing so far with GenAI are on agent assist tools. Yep. So things that are helping them get up to speed faster, things that are helping them find information, their knowledge bases, their next best action. So a lot of that's helping them improve their experience and efficiency, and then is in turn ostensibly helping the customer experience.
Yeah. All right. Okay. I'm happy to share these slides with anyone who would like them. Come and see me afterwards. Thank you guys for giving BFSI so much love. Yay.